Okay, let's dive into the source material you've shared for today.
Yeah.
We're looking at South Africa's economy, the challenges, and some potential ways forward being discussed.
Absolutely. And the core of our deep dive today comes from excerpts from a piece called Thomas Hausen on South Africa's economic growth. He's a very, well, specific viewpoint.
Right, and our aim here really is just to pull out the key ideas for you. Cut through some of the noise, give you a clear picture quickly. That includes the specific takes on policy and international talks mentioned in the text. So let's get straight into Thomas Hausen's main argument. What's the central point?
Well, Thomas Hausen puts it very directly. The text argues, and I'm quoting here, that the path forward cannot be resolved by nationalizing relative and absolute wealth, but only by an aggressive economic growth and employment policy.
Okay, aggressive economic growth and employment policy. That's quite a statement. What's
Yeah.
really being emphasized there? Why frame that as the sort of necessary alternative to nationalizing wealth?
It's a fascinating framing, isn't it? The author seems to view nationalizing wealth, which you could interpret as maybe redistributing existing assets, maybe tangible things like absolute wealth, or even opportunities, relative wealth, as simply not the solution.
So, not the way forward.
Exactly. Instead, the whole emphasis is on, well, actively growing the economy. The viewpoint suggests that the fundamental problem, what the source actually calls development failure in South Africa,
Development failure, right.
can only be tackled by creating new wealth, new jobs, and doing it aggressively on a large scale. So the perspective that really prioritizes making the whole economic pie bigger.
Rather than focusing on how the current pie is divided.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Seeing that expansion as the only essential way to overcome the stagnation described.
Okay, so that's one big lever identified in the source. Internal policy, laser focused on growth and jobs, explicitly not wealth redistribution as the fix for this development failure. But there's another piece to this in the source, isn't there? It talks about a meeting in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it does. And it specifically notes it was behind closed doors.
And the focus, also quite specific. How to overcome the development failure in the South African economy. So same core problem.
Right. It adds an international dimension to the internal policy focus we just talked about.
And the source mentions what they hoped would come out of this meeting. Things like the abolishment of tariffs on both sides and stronger foreign investment support for South Africa.
Yeah.
So how do these actions, lowering trade barriers, boosting investment, how do they connect to tackling that development failure, according to this text?
Well, if you link it back to that goal of aggressive economic growth,
Okay.
these international actions are presented as sort of crucial external boosts. Getting rid of tariffs, for example, could make trade smoother, maybe boost exports, make imports cheaper, things that fuel business.
Makes sense.
And stronger foreign investment, well, it's not just about the money, is it? It often brings technology, know-how, management skills, and, of course, jobs, directly or indirectly.
New jobs.
So, you see, while Thomas Hausen points inward towards domestic policy choices, this Washington meeting discussion points outward. It highlights external policy changes and financial flows as different levers.
Different levers, but aiming at the same goal.
Potentially complementary levers, yeah. Both aimed at overcoming that development failure by sparking economic activity and growth. It just shows there are different paths, internal and external, apparently being considered.
Exactly. So just pulling from this specific source you shared, we've got, on one hand, a clear argument for an internal strategy. Aggressive growth, aggressive employment, not nationalization presented as the only fix.
Quite emphatic on that point.
And then alongside that, there's this focus on international cooperation, like that Washington meeting, looking at trade, looking at investment, to tackle the very same development failure.
Two distinct approaches, really. Internal policy levers versus external support mechanisms.
Both aimed at addressing South Africa's economic situation, as laid out here.
Yeah, different ways to try and generate momentum for recovery and growth.
Okay, so let's recap the sharp points we've extracted. There's Thomas Hausen's specific take. Growth and employment over nationalization, and then the international angle highlighted by that DC meeting. Tariffs, investment, all focused on solving this development failure.
Those are definitely the core insights coming out of this particular text.
So here's something to think about, based purely on this source material. Considering these points, this tension between national wealth distribution versus prioritizing aggressive growth, and then the role of international support through trade and investment, What does this source suggest are the main avenues being explored for South Africa's economy? And maybe what does the mention of these different, perhaps even competing approaches tell you about just how complex finding the right solutions really is? Definitely something to mull over after this deep dive.